Okay, so in this week's guitar lesson, we're going to be looking at both the rhythm and the lead component to this jazzy blues style composition. I always hate the word jazzy. It sounds so amateur, but it's the best way to describe this. And if you've ever wanted to work some of those jazzier chord progressions or even chords into your blues, this will be a great lesson for that. That's what we're going to be really talking about, is what gives it that sound. Why does it sound different than a standard sort of generic 12-bar blues? There's some chord things we're doing that give it that sound. So we're going to talk about what that is as we get into this video. I've got this lesson split into two parts. So in this video, we're going to go through the first half, which is the rhythm half. If you'd like to watch the second half, which is the lead half, so watch that video and then also download the tablature for this entire lesson and the MP3 jam tracks, which I have in multiple tempos. You can get those extra materials by going to activemelody.com, go to the weekly lessons page, and do a search for EP536. Okay, so this song is in the key of A, and if we were playing a generic 12-bar blues, we would really be working with 3 chords. We'd have a 1 chord, a 4 chord, and a 5 chord. That's what gives it that sort of classic blues sound. I realize there's always exceptions to the rule, and the order of those chords can change, but that's generally what it is. So if you're playing an A, you'd have an A for your 1 chord, you'd have a D for your 4 chord, and then you'd have an E for your 5 chord. And those numbers, by the way, those come from the major scale. Somebody always asks, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it's just the major scale. So I'm taking the first, the fourth, and the fifth note from that major scale and making a chord out of those notes. That's where the 1, 4, 5 comes from. Now in jazz, you have more of a 2-5-1 sound. That's the way to describe it. I realize there's lots of different ways we can play jazz, but that's the generic chord format for jazz. So it starts, a 2 chord is a minor chord. So if we were playing in the key of A, it would sound like this. You have your 2, 5, 1, and it resolves. It's got a more soft landing. That's probably the best way I can describe it. It's still resolving, it's still coming down to the ground, but it sort of floats down like a feather, as opposed to a little more harsh sound of the blues. Generalizing, I realize. But anyway, what we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to be talking about how you take that 2-5-1 and integrate that into your 1-4-5 in different spots. That's what gives it that jazzy sound. Whether you're playing lead or rhythm, it's really working the 2-5-1, some variation of it, into your playing. And once we get into this, you're going to understand how to do it, and it totally makes sense. It's really not that complicated. Okay, so let's listen to the first part and then we'll talk about it. All right, so as I mentioned, the song is in the key of A, and I'm starting off with an A7 chord. I'm playing it right here. I'm barring on the 5th fret. In fact, mentally, I'm thinking about the E shape from the Cage system. That's my A chord, my A major chord. If I played that chord right here and I took my pinky off, now I've got that flat 7, right? So now I get that nice A7 sound. And what blueses it up even more is the hammer-on with the middle finger. And then, so I play that's kind of like the bottom part of the chord. And then I come in and do a little burst and hit the top part of the chord. Actually, I'm just hitting strings 1 and 2. But that's one thing you can walk away with. Simple idea. If you want to blues up a chord, you could do this for any chord now. You just play the 7 version of it, hammer on, and then the top part. You hear that in the blues a lot, right? That's just a way of building that chord. So hopefully somebody out there is excited about that one little piece of information. It's not much, but you could do a lot with it. So I started with that. And I came in right on the 1. If you were counting this out, you'd say 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Now that little upstroke comes in on the and of 2. So it's like this: 1 and 2 and. And now I'm not going to be calling out all of these, all of the numbers like that, because it would just bog this thing down. And that's not how you need to think about this anyway. I know some of you are very literal and you want it that way. Now, if you're a premium member, you do have access to the tab, and it's all very literal, so you can follow it that way. But the better way to think about this, when you're playing these little comps like this, these little bursts of notes, is to think more rhythmically and kind of get your hand in motion like this, almost like you're patting your leg. That's how I do it. So if I were to play this first part, it'd be like this. You can see I'm already, slapping the strings a little bit to get that rhythm going. That's how you got to think about it. Start off slow, and then you can start working up to it. Okay, so now we come into our 4 chord, which is our D chord. And I slid into it like this. I'll put the chord voicing up so that you can follow that on the screen so I don't have to call out each note. We've played this chord before many times. Actually, both of these are must-know shapes if you want to play the blues. You've got your 1 chord now, right? You've got your 4 chord, and then you go up 2 frets from there. You got your 5 chord. Just with these 2 shapes, you can play the blues already, and even jazz them up a little bit. So with this 9 chord, what I love about that when you're playing those middle 4 strings is you can slide into it from below or above. You've got that option. The other point I want to make is when we play that A chord, our A note is on that 5th fret 6th string. When we played our D chord, our 4 chord, our D note is on the 5th fret 5th string. Look at that, they're on top of each other. So 1 chord, 4 chord. And then, like I said, you could go up 2 frets from there and play your 5 chord. That would be your E note. So you can see that little L shape there. I'll put a lesson up on the screen. I refer back to this quite a bit, but that's an easy way to start thinking about and visualizing these chords and how they relate to each other. Okay, so after the 4 chord, we go back to the 1 chord, and this is what I played. All upstrokes, because it just helped me rhythmically, and it helped me to keep my hand in motion, like I mentioned. But the chord there, it lands on this chord, which is an A13 chord. Let me show you how to play the chord. Let's start with that A13. We're going to build up to it. But it's really, these 3 fingers are playing what I think of as think of your A minor shape. You know, that A minor chord, first chord, one of the first chords you learn to play. If you were to move that A minor chord and play it all the way up here, where your middle finger's on the 10th fret 2nd string, it looks like this. And then you put your index finger on that 10th fret 5th string. You're playing what would be an A13. All right, so let's take this 13 chord voicing and make it accessible so that you can find this going forward and play it over any chord. That way you can do things like in any key. So what I do is when I'm playing this chord with this fingering, I look at where my middle finger is. That's on the 2nd string. In this case, when I'm playing the A13, it's on the 10th fret. That's my A note. So hopefully you can see what's going on there. This note tells you the name of the chord, basically. So if I wanted to play an E13, I would just find my E note on the 2nd string and play it with my middle finger, and then I'd let my other fingers fall into place so that I can play that E13 chord using that voicing. So that's how that works. Let's get back to our A. Here's a little sidebar. Here's another way you can voice that 13 chord. This is another easy way to to find it and visualize it. Play your A chord. This is just your A major chord using the E shape from Cage. Lift your pinky just like we did in the beginning. Make your A7. Now when you lift your pinky, put your pinky back down. In this case, it would be on the 7th fret 2nd string. And when I play that, listen to those top 4 strings. Compare that to this. Same notes. So that's another way to voice that chord. So you can do the same slides. Now, all the stuff that you were doing with it, in this voicing, you can do it in this one as well. Now, this is where it starts to get fun because as I was showing you that 9 chord, we can slide it around. We can do the same thing with this. In fact, to get to this, I started 2 frets down, so I went and walked it up that way. And you've heard that in the blues before, right? Or especially in like old swing jazz, and you've heard that kind of working up to the chord. You can also start a half step up and work it down. However you want to do it. You can't go too far away from home, but any combination of that will allow you to land on the 1, which is your A13. That 13 chord gives it more of a jazzy sound. All right, so structurally, we've stuck to the blues so far. We've had our 1 chord, we did a quick change to the 4 chord, and then we're back to the 1 chord. And then what happens in the blues? It goes back to the 4 chord, right? Now, this is where we're going to go into that jazz mode and jazz things up. Instead of us just going straight into the 4 chord, that's what you do in a blues, just a standard blues. But in this jazzy blues, we're going to play the 2-5-1 of the 4 chord. Not the 2-5-1 of the key of the song, so not the 2-5-1 of A, but the 2-5-1 of the chord we're going to. So that's how this works. So we're going to a 4 chord, so its 2 chord would be an E minor. Its 5 chord would be an A7, and then you resolve to it, the D, as the 1. So that's how we have to think about this, is the 2-5-1 of the chord you're going to. That's what gives this style that sound. So we can do variations on that. Here's how I played it. I play it like this. Okay, so I started with the E minor. That's the 2 of the D chord. And I just did, think of your E minor chord here using the A minor shape, but just the top 3 strings. That little stair step shape. 7th fret 1st string, 8th fret 2nd string, 9th fret 3rd string. So I just played that. And then instead of the 5 chord, instead of playing the A, one other technique is to take the 1 chord that you're going to, which is our D, but you go up a half step, so you go to like the D sharp. And so you could play the D sharp and then go to the D. That's another way of structuring it. It still has that 2-5-1 sound, but we didn't play the 5. We just played the sharp version of the 1. Okay, so let me demonstrate it. There's the 2, the 1 sharp, or the D sharp, and then down to the D. Okay, so that's just another way of doing it. So instead of playing 2-5-1, there's another takeaway for you. You can play the 2-1 sharp 1. I mean, if that's how you want to think of it. And it kind of makes sense because you're kind of sliding down into the chord you're going to. Or in the case of D, you'd be coming down into it, right? So you're still resolving back to the 1. So 2, 1 sharp, and then the 1. Now, what is this chord voicing? So remember we played a D9 before, we played it down here. Let's look at the top 4 strings of that. Hear that? Let's look at this. Same exact notes. We're just playing them in a different voicing. Once you understand these voicings in these 2 different spots, this like opens up the whole fretboard for you. So you have a little box there, and it fits right in the middle 4 strings. It's perfect. There's no open strings here. And when I'm saying there's no open strings, it's a good thing because we can slide it from below, slide it from above. All right, so now that we know how to play this 9 chord voicing, how do we find this going forward? This is a rootless chord, so there's actually not a root. So there's no D note in this, even though it's spelling out the D chord, especially when you're playing along with the jam track. It puts it in context. But there's not an actual D note that's being played there. You can play a rootless chord like this. That's legit. So here's an easy way. I'll give you 2 easy ways to find it going forward. Is to take, in this case, I would take my pinky and just collapse it so that I can hit the 1st string. So if I'm playing that chord, I can play that 1st string as well. That note fits in with the chord because that's my D note. So that's my D9 chord voicing, and there's my D note. So that's one way to think about it. The other way is to just connect it to your E shape from the cage system. So that's where you're barring on that 10th fret if we're playing the D. And so then I just look at where that bar is and I put my 2 fingers in there and I go ahead and make that chord voicing. That's another sort of a real simple way of just thinking about it visually, but that's 2 ways that you can get at that chord. And this is kind of, this is also referred to as the T-Bone Walker chord. Sometimes I'll call it that, or it's the Stormy Monday chord because it just works so well to slide it up and down. So if you want to find this chord then going forward, just find the note name on your 1st string with your pinky, drop it down to the 2nd string, and then make your chord like that. Now, let's couple that with what we just looked at when we played that A13 chord. That was right here in the same neighborhood too, remember? So we walked up to right here. Now watch this. This will be a huge light bulb slash takeaway for a lot of you. So you've got your 1 chord. Look at this. There's your 4 chord right next to it. And remember, you can always take your 4 chord, slide it up 2 frets to play your 5 chord. So I've got my whole blues. I can slide them. There's my 4 chord. Back to my 1 chord. Here's my 5. Right? Now hopefully that got somebody excited. That was just 1, 4, 5, but I'm playing it sounds a little jazzier because we're playing that 13 chord and a 9 chord. And we're using chord voicings that you wouldn't use if you're playing just straight up blues. So let me back it up from the beginning and play up to that point. I'll play it slowly. We have that's the 13 chord. Now here's our 2, 5, 1. 1 sharp. All right, now we're back to the 4 chord. Okay, so we're into that D9, but we're playing it here. Now we're going to play some other variations of D9. Listen to this. To get us back to the 1. So let's look at that. So it starts with this. Now I've used this chord voicing in other lessons. To me, this is the hideaway chord. I always think of Freddie King's Hideaway or Eric Clapton with the Blues Breakers. That chord. That's another way to voice a 9 chord. And it looks complicated, but it's actually very easy to get under your fingers. It's not hard to play. And then we're going to take, and I lift my pinky and just play the top 3 strings to play this. This is going to make sense. I'm going to explain why this is working here in a minute. But look at this voicing. I'll put that up on the screen as well. So we have this, and then we have just the bar on the top 3 strings there of the 7th fret. So we have, and then we slide that bar 2 frets down, and we do our hammer-on into that A chord, right? It's the same hammer-on as we did for the first version of that. But this time I'm just playing the top 3 strings of that A chord, the little triad. So we have... Now, what's going on there, as I mentioned, I'll explain that, is a little movement there, a little melody line that's going... You can hear that note, listen for it. Right? So it's that, weaving the little melody into the chords that kind of help it spell out what's going on. I love that. And to me, this sounds like a horn section, like a horn part. And when I got back to that A chord and did that hammer on, I played it like this. This is another must know for the blues. We're barring the first 3 strings on the 5th fret. We're only really playing strings 2 and 3. Do an upstroke. Actually, I take that back. I think I am playing the top 3 strings there. I'm just going to say it at that. And then the top 3 strings on the 7th fret. And then hammer on. But you got to kind of stagger that hammer on. Like that. So it gives it a little bit of a rhythm. And then you hit the top string. That's just a great, easy little blues thing. You're going from the 1 chord to the 4 chord and back to the 1 chord. That's what's going on there. And it's kind of got a gospel piano vibe. So you could do... Right? That's another big idea right there. And it's just coming out of that concept of the 1 chord to its 4 chord, the D chord to its 4 chord, right? So that's part of what gives this that sound. Okay, so let's see, we've got... All right, now after that, well, actually, let me play it, and then we'll talk it through. All right, so now we're going to go to this chord, and then this one. and then this one. Whoa, what's going on here? So let's think about it. So we're going to the 2 chord. Remember, we're going to think 2-5-1. This is where you get into like layers of the 2-5-1. So we're getting to the 2-5-1. So there's the 2, but I did something to get to the 2. So I ended up playing the 5 chord of the 2. This is called a secondary dominant chord. I'll put a link up to a deep dive lesson I did just on this topic, on secondary dominant chord. But what we're playing is an F sharp 7, basically, which is the 5 chord of B minor. And B, so there's a 5 chord, and then it resolves to its 1. Which is, or a minor 1 in this case. So it's a B minor. Actually, I'm playing a B minor 7 when I'm doing that, because I've got my pinky off. Same thing as like when we played the major chord. You take your pinky off, you get the 7 version, the flat 7. So anyway, we have the F sharp 7. That's your secondary dominant. It resolves to the B minor. But instead of me just playing the F sharp 7 like that, I played it like this. That's an F sharp 7 with a sharp 9, it's the Hendrix chord, and then I lift my pinky and I collapse my index finger so that it's hitting that, what is that, the 8th fret 2nd string, that note. So you have the sharp 9, the flat 9, so F sharp 7 flat 9, and then go to that B minor, or the B minor 7. And then a little embellishment off that B minor. I've got my pinky free. Remember, I took my pinky off. I can go ahead and add it and do an upstroke. I added it to the 9th fret 1st string. And when I do an upstroke, I'm playing a B minor 9. So after that B minor 9, I just let my pinky slide up 1 more fret, and I played this D diminished 7 chord. And that became a tension chord to get me to this. And so this is a C sharp minor 7. It's the same voicing as what we played for the B minor. We just slid it up 2 frets. That's my 3 chord. I walk it down. I walk it down again. So I'm really walking from the 3 chord down to the 2 chord. So 3, go down 1, go down 1 again, down to the 2 chord. And so that's got me to my 2, and then we're going to do the 5, and then resolve on the 1, actually like that. So we're going to walk it down. We got the 3 chord, and then I'm walking that down to the 2. Now from here, so all of that was a setup just to get me to the 2. I wanted to create extra tension right before the 2. That kind of resolved to the 2. But now from the 2, we're going to play the 5, and then the 1. So we have our 2, which is where we're at, and we're going to get back home. So we're going to play the 5, which is our E, but I'm going to do that E7 sharp 9, just like we did with the Hendrix chord, and then the flat 9 version of that, and then resolve it to the A, or the A7. So I realize there's a lot of twists and turns here, but it's all kind of getting you to the same thing. Anytime you want to go to a 2 chord or do a 2-5-1, you can, first of all, you can do them of any of your chords, but you can also create extra tension before you get to the 2. You can play its 5 chord or the 3 chord, walk it to the 2, then play the 5, then the 1. There's all kinds of little things you can do to jazz up your blues, but hopefully you've walked away with a few ideas from this. Now, join us in part 2 where we'll go over a lead. It's going to be the same bass part underneath and drum track, and we're just going to play a little lead on top of that and try and follow those chords with a lead. All right, we'll see you in part 2.